u okviru programa Festivala sarajevske zime budemo domaćini predavanju koje će održati njegova ekscelencija, ambasador Indije u Mađarskoj i nerezidentni ambasador Bosne i Hercegovine, koji će nam govoriti o prekrasnoj Indiji. Dear guests, welcome to the University of Sarajevo. We have a pleasure to be host of Her Excellency Mr. Malay Mishra, Ambassador of Republic of India in Hungary and non-resident Ambassador to Bosnia and Herzegovina, who will have a lecture about incredible India. Mogla bi gospodine rektore da se obrati. I would kindly invite Rector of the University of Sarajevo to take the floor.
Uvaženi zvaničnici, poštovane kolegice i kolege, dame i gospodo. Osobito mi je zadovoljstvo pozdraviti vas, zaželjeti vam dobrodošlicu i u ime univerziteta, vaše ime i svoje ime, iskazati zahvalnost njegovoj ekscelenciji gospodinu Malaju Mišri, što je prihvatio poziv univerziteta i festivala Sarajevska zima da bude predavač na današnjem tribini. Od pamtivijeka Indija ima posebno mjesto u evropskim predozama. Novi svijet je otkriven u traženju novog puta za Indiju. Koliko eseja, knjiga, predstava, filmova, koliko vojnih, trgovačkih, kulturnih pohoda je pod okriljem puta u Indiju. Svi mi imamo trenutke unutarnjeg susreta sa Indijom. Za mene su u mladosti taj trenutak predstavljali antimemoari Andre Malraux. Kao što rekoh, ovo je programski događaj unutar jubilarne sarajevske zime, 30. nakon olimpijskih igara. Zahvaljujem direktoru festivala, gospodinu Draginu Spatiću, također na ovoj inicijativi. Jedna druga olimpijada, na koju sam vodio mlade matematičke talente naše zemlje, dala mi je priliku da doživim Mumbai 1997. kao što su i zasjedanje Internacionalne matematičke unije i Svjetski kongres matematičara porodili utiske Bangalora i Hyderabada 2010. Indija je mjesto nastanka 4 velike neabrahamske religije i mjesto čiju povijest i sadašnjost su snažno oblikovala i susretanja s abrahamovskim tradicijama. U različitim periodima veličanstvena, plodna, turbulentna. Republika Indija je danas druga po naseljenosti država svijeta i jedna od najbrže razvijajućih ekonomija svijeta. U ovom času na 11. mjestu po nominalnom bruto-društvenom proizvodu. Indija je i nuklearna sila. Sve to je bilo ono što dolazi na um, dok sa zanimanjem očekujemo obraćanje našeg današnjeg izvođača, njegove ekscelencije gospodina Malaja Mišre, kao što ste čuli, ambasadora Republike Indije u Mađarskoj i nerezidentnog ambasadora u Bosni i Hercegovini. Na dan predaje akreditiva njegova ekscelencija je u duhu drevne civilizacije i vrijednosti civilizacije koju pripada. Nakon svečanog čina predaje akreditiva posjetila i univerzitet u Sarajevu. Danas ćemo u ovoj svečanoj sali govoriti, ili danas će nam naš gost govoriti na temu Vječna Indija i savremeni svijet. Your Excellency, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, students, members of the faculty of the University of Sarajevo. Please pardon me if I proceed a little fast, because my good friend Ibrahim Spanic has told me to wind up this presentation in 35 minutes. So I have to literally run, and I do not know if you can follow me in my running speed. But still the pictures convey 1,000 words, as we say. So we begin with the pictures. Let me first convey my great appreciation to the Honorable Mayor, Rector of University of Sarajevo, whose premises has been given to us very kindly for my first presentation and my first formal introduction to this university, if I may say so. Dr. Abdi Spajic, Honorable Minister, Federal Minister for Education and Science, Mr. Damir Masic, my very dear friend Ibrahim Spajic, without whom I couldn't have been here. He invited me 2 months back when I was in this country to present my credentials, and this is my second visit, and we felt that there was perhaps an interest of people here in knowing something about India. And this is a very basic presentation which I have brought for those of you who may have known a little or those of you who do not know at all. So it is a very introduction, I would say, a very basic introduction. And perhaps this may ignite in you the interest in knowing more about India. I would also like to thank all members of the University Council. I would also like to thank Madam Liliana Sulentic, without whose cooperation we couldn't have mounted this program at all. She's done so much. Thank you very much, Madam. And I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Madam Sita Somun, President of the Indo-Bosnian Friendship Society, Mr. Somun, friends from the ISKCON Society, Mr. Darko, and our other friend. Maybe I have missed some, but please forgive me because I have to really proceed fast now. I call the theme of my presentation as Eternal India in the Contemporary World. There are two words here. One is the word on eternal, which conveys a sense of eternity, conveys a sense of permanence, that it is permanent for all times. And the other is contemporary. Contemporary, we all know it is modern. So India is both contemporary as well as eternal. And that is what my presentation will bring out during the course of my few slides that I have brought. You will see that India is not only the longest civilization, but the longest continuing civilization in the world. In other words, what we had 5,000 years ago is still very much there. What we follow in our society, in our towns, in our villages, and that is what the introduction will be. So here we go. I've just given you just a world map so that you can place India, you know where India is. India is here. This is the size of India. It is completely overshadowed by China, you can see. And here this part is the Himalaya mountains. And Himalaya mountains kind of borders India and China. And they will have other countries. I think you will be somewhere here, the Balkans. And we have a certain distance, but not much. Nowadays distances are always irrelevant. So this is Vedic India. I started particularly with this because our civilization, Indian civilization, known to have begun with the Vedic India period. So this is a very good introduction to know India, because these were the 4 texts which started the Vedas. What we say, maybe some of you know the Vedas. Vedas are ancient texts of Indian philosophy. Long before even the religion of Hinduism came, long before anything else came, this was there. At this time there were not books. These books were codified later. But at that time there were these seers who had visualized certain things in their own lives, and they communicated with nature, communicated with divinity, communicated with various aspects of the sky, moons, sun, etc. And they wrote down these principles of life, which were later codified in four Vedas, which came in different periods. The first Veda is Rig Veda, which came around the time of 2000 to 1500 BC. So this is where Indian civilization is ascribed to. So roughly we can say between 4,500 to 5,000 years Indian civilization. And the Vedas, why I am saying, is even today, if you go to any temple or any other institution of learning in India, you will see the Vedas still being taught. So they are not lost to us. It is a kind of an oral tradition which we have followed. It has gone for thousands of years, and the same Vedas have continued to this day with more and more commentaries and the like. Mohenjo-daro is very interesting that it is coincided around the same time, 2700 BC, and archaeologists ascribe that Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, these two were the first signs of Indian civilization. And I will tell you where. See, present-day Pakistan and present-day India, you will see Mohenjo-daro is here and Harappa is here. So these two were on the banks of this river Ravi, Sutlej and Indus. Indus was a big river at the time. Indus no longer exists. Indus is lost. But we have Ravi and Sutlej, and we have other rivers also which form this basin, river basin. Why it was a big civilization began? Because it was very fertile. The land was very fertile. People wanted to do agriculture and they wanted to settle down. So this civilization is believed to be the largest urban settlement in the world, because it goes up to 2500, 2700 years BC, before Christ. I come, because there is paucity of time, to what we call reform movements in Hinduism. I'll come later. This Vedic civilization later on went on to form a kind of religion, which was later on known as Hinduism. Why Hinduism? You will ask. Many people don't know why Hinduism. Hinduism because Hinduism flourished on the banks of the Indus River, what I showed you. So from Indus, it became Sindhu, the Indian version of Indus, and from Sindhu became Hindu. The people who lived around the river basin were called Hindus. It had nothing to do with the religion at the time. They were a group of people called Sindhu settlers, who were also called Hindus, who later on came to be known as Hindus following a certain religion. This is, later on there were some reform movements, namely two big reform movements of Buddhism and Jainism. You perhaps know all about the Buddha. Jainism, Mahavir Jain was a contemporary of Gautam Buddha. They came around the same time in the 6th century BC. But Buddha, ironically, though he was born on the foothills of the Himalayas towards Nepal, he spent all his years, 80 years of his life in India, getting his nirvana, giving his sermons, and finally passing away. The irony is that today in India we do not have practicing Buddhism. Buddhism is flourishing more in Southeast Asia and in East Asia. More you will see Buddhism in Thailand or Malaysia or Japan or Korea, but not in India. In India there are monuments, there are relics where Buddhism flourished during a certain time, but now it is gone. However, Jainism has stayed in India. Why? Because Buddhism gave a big threat to Hinduism, to Orthodox Hinduism. So the Hindu people wanted to get rid of Buddhism. So it traveled to Sri Lanka through a king called Ashoka. This is the king who popularized Buddhism, Emperor Ashoka. He came about a century and a half after Buddhism was born. And he sent as emissaries his own children, daughter and son, to faraway places. For example, he sent them to Sri Lanka Today Sri Lanka, Buddhism is the official religion of Sri Lanka. Thanks to him. He sent, and thereafter Buddhism broke into two cults. It was called Mahayana Buddhism and Hinayana Buddhism. Mahayana is what we see popularly in Far East, Southeast, etc. Hinayana has stayed in Sri Lanka mostly. Now, Buddhist heritage, just a glimpse of Buddhist heritage. Ajanta, if you have heard about these two beautiful World Heritage sites called Ajanta and Ellora. Yeah. Now, these were the sites were founded from, oh my God, from the 2nd century BC to about 7th century BC. Over a period of 700 years, these caves were built, and all these caves are wonderful paintings, cave paintings. Many people come here. This was the first creative work of Buddhist monks in India. This was followed by Ellora around the same period, a little later on, 5th to 10th century, where you have these rock cult temples. And these temples went down into the earth. From the earth, they carved the rocks inside. So you can see this temple, which is actually over that is the surface of the earth. And this is the temple down below. Exquisite carving. So there are total 34 caves here, out of which 12 are Buddhist, 7 are Hindu, and 5 are Jain. So over a period of these 5 centuries, many people had come there, lived there, and had their settlement there. This is a flourishing work of Hindu art later on, much later. This came in Hampi, Karnataka, on Western India, on southwestern India, and this happened between 14th, 15th and 16th centuries, when this part of the world was the richest in the world. In fact, I should tell you here that even Western historians have acknowledged that till the 12th and 13th century, India was the richest country in the world in terms of material prosperity. From the 12th till about 18th century, India and China were the two richest countries in the world, until we got the invasion of Western civilization, until we got the invasion of the British and many other people who came to India and looted our riches, our wealth. And therefore, India today, what India is a modern India. We are trying to come up to, maybe not to the same level of prosperity, but trying to be that. Mughal period is a very flourishing period in Muslim history, Islamic history. This is the empire. I just gloss over it. This is a king called Akbar. You may have heard his name. He is a very famous king. There was a Mughal dynasty. He was the most powerful and most famous ruler of the Mughal dynasty. Just one thing you may notice, he founded Din-e-Ilahi. This is the first religion of India which was based on a fusion of Hinduism and Islam. He wanted to bring these two communities together by having this religion. He didn't succeed, because in India you will always see that there are differences between the two communities, Islamic and Hindu communities in India. This is again another reform movement within Islam called Sufism. It's a big movement. It started around the 12th, 13th century by several Sufi. This was actually the Orthodox Islam was challenged by the Sufis. And they were more into devotional religion, like what we had a Bhakti movement among the Hindus. So Sufis and Bhakti saints of Hindus were all together. At the same time, they had a movement for about 400-500 years. It is still very powerful. And all these dargahs you see, this is a Dargah Sharif in Ajmer in Rajasthan. in northern India. It is very famous for this Sufi saint who has been buried there. Of course, who doesn't know Taj Mahal? This was built by the Mughal king Shah Jahan in memory of his wife who passed away, giving birth to her 13th child. So the emperor thought it good to construct a mausoleum. It is a mausoleum. It's not a mosque. Many people think that it is a masjid. It is not a prayer place. It is a mourning place. It is a mausoleum because it contains the tomb of Mumtaz, the wife of Shah Jahan. While Shah Jahan is buried in Agra Fort, close by. This is Agra Fort, again another superb monument made by Shah Jahan during that period. Contains both Hindu and Islamic architecture. And this is close to Taj Mahal. Bahadur Shah Zafar was the last Mughal emperor of the Mughal dynasty who was dethroned by the British and banished to this country called Myanmar, present day Myanmar. It was Rangoon, Burma. You may know the name of Burma. He was buried there, he passed his life there. Now comes British Raj, how Indians bore the burden of the British on their shoulders and brought the British, literally brought the British. In first phase of East India Company, they are a company. They are a mercantile company. They come to India to do business. So they come and set up factories in various parts of India. The second part, the company gradually acquires sovereignty over large parts of India. Because what was happening in India, India was divided into several residencies, several principalities. So this company was going and doing business and trapping one by one the presidency. The company was becoming bigger and bigger. And finally, in 1857, there was a big Indian revolt, or we call the Indian War of Independence. After that, the companies, because the Indian soldiers were defeated, badly defeated, because they were scattered, they came from various places, the British were very much organized, so they defeated. And after that, the company's powers transferred to the Crown, Queen Victoria. She became the sovereign of India from 1858 to 1947 until India got independence. This is the rule of the British, the complete rule, imperial rule of the British, where you can see one very interesting thing here is up till Afghanistan. It goes up beyond Balochistan. It touches the borders of Afghanistan. So Afghanistan was India's neighbor at the time. A little bit about spirituality, which is India's very powerful strength. We believe in a certain stream of spirituality which has come down from our Vedic civilization. These were two giants of those times, of the freedom movement times, Sri Aurobindo and Swami Vivekananda. Both did immense work for the preservation and promotion of Indian religion within India and outside. And they had several followers. Swami Vivekananda established his Vedanta societies. He was a Vedic person. He established his Vedanta societies all over the world. But he lived only for 39 years. He passed away at the age of 39. We'll see some stalwarts of our freedom movement, who were the leaders of our freedom movement, coming with Mahatma Gandhi, who gave the powerful leadership of national movement of India. You have Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who was the first Home Minister. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was the first Prime Minister. Sarojini Naidu, who was again another brilliant leader of her times. And Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, who was the first Education Minister. These are real great leaders. There are so many of them, but I have kept. This is one big moment in our national movement. Mahatma Gandhi picking up a lump of salt on the shore of Dandi. That is where he gives a big impetus to the freedom movement by telling that my birthright is salt. You cannot tax me on my salt. Because salt is a very simple thing, is a very common thing. Without salt, people can't have food. And he did this strategy to gain the attention of the world to this cause. that the British were exploiting the Indians by various taxes. So by hitting the British through a salt tax, he said, I will go against the British law, through defying your laws in your own legal system. And he did it. And when he was doing that, he said, I want to have the world's attention in this fight of right against might. So this was a fight of right against might, and I will do that and let the world see what we can do. So this was 1930, and thereafter, of course, it starts on with much vigor. 1942, this is Nehru and Gandhi. This is the beginning of Quit India movement, where the Congress party gives an ultimatum to the British to leave the country, quit India. Otherwise, we will take more measures. So this was the beginning of the Quit India movement in 1942. Jawaharlal Nehru, two facets. He was called children's leader. He was a children's man. He always loved children. And here he is with John F. Kennedy and Johnson. This man is called Jinnah. Jinnah was the founding father of Pakistan. He set up this All India Muslim League, and thereafter went on to become the first Prime Minister of independent Pakistan. We got separated on the 14th and 15th of August. That was the biggest blow to India and the subcontinent. That here you can see this separation. You can see the people, the exodus of people from both sides of the border. And this is just one picture. 14.5 million people crossing the borders, out of which about 10 million people were killed. Hindus were killing Muslims and Muslims were killing Hindus, because Jinnah wanted all the Muslims of India to come to Pakistan and take out all the Hindus out of Pakistan to India. He couldn't succeed because Muslims were all over India. He could not really filter them out from there and take them there. But for some time it worked. See, at the time of 15th August 1947, it's a very interesting picture. Here you have West Pakistan, which is Pakistan, and East Pakistan, which is today called Bangladesh. So there were two provinces, West and East. So they had East in their charge, which was later on became an independent country. And this is where Jinnah's theory proved wrong. His theory, two-nation theory, that Muslims will have one nation, Hindus will have one nation, it proved wrong. Because Bangladesh also was a Muslim nation. I have now show you some current strides. We have GDP at current prices. We are the 11th largest economy at current prices. 1.75 trillion US dollars economy, fairly big. GDP at PPP prices, which is the population and people index, price index, it is 4.9 trillion, nearly 5 trillion economy, with a population, as you know, of 1.25 billion people. Which is 1,250 million people. Our certain strides in our industries, second largest steel producer, third largest coal producer, etc. We have made quite a number of strides in a number of areas. Infrastructure building, dams. I have seen some small dams we have huge dams in India. And we harness water not only for irrigation purpose, but also for various other things. We have hydroelectric projects, we generate electricity like you. We also have a lot of irrigation coming out from these dams. So we have several such dams, about 10 odd dams, big dams like this. And this ushered in the Green Revolution. I don't know whether you've heard about this Green Revolution. Green Revolution was a revolution in agriculture in India. It happened in the 1960s. Until then, India was dependent on food crops. India was importing food from America, other countries also. But in the 1960s, this revolution happened. And our scientists proved that we could produce our own food. And not only produce, today we are a large agriculture exporting country in the world. We export a lot of food. This is our high-tech industry, just some snapshots. This is a nuclear power plant. That is IIT Bombay. I think Rector mentioned about IIT Bombay. This is one of the leading institutions in the area of nanotechnology, besides other areas. Nanotechnology is a growing field now, and they are now linked up with this nanotechnology center in USA, one of the many collaborations. Highly skilled, low-wage manpower. It is manpower which is 50% of our population is less than 25. I think your age, what you are, 50% of India's population is that. And another 10% will be another 10, which means below 25 is 50%, and below 35 is 65% of the population. So you can feel that India is throbbing, is a young country, though it is the oldest civilization, it is the youngest nation, and that is how we have a great advantage, what we call the demographic dividend. A demographic dividend is dividend through demographics. Our demographics is helping us to move forward. And we are skilling these populations in a number of ways, in education and other things. This is agriculture, some snaps of agriculture. We use a lot of technology in our agriculture. Biotechnology is the recent development, but besides biotechnology, irrigation has come in a big way. Computerization has come in a big way. Our farmers have all mobile telephones. We are the second largest mobile telephone user in the world, with nearly 1,000 million mobile users. You see that slide. And this is what we did, the green revolution. Biotech, Indian biotech industry grew 15.1% in the financial year 2013. Total industry size was 4.3 billion till 2013. So we estimate that it will have a 15% year-on-year increase of biotechnology, which is a very, very potential subject for us. Yes, I'm going to finish now. Manufacturing, various aspects of manufacturing, you see there. This is our education. Our education, we have several systems of education, and this is our tertiary education, what you have here, universities. And this is our various IIMs, Indian Institute of Management, and IITs, Indian Institute of Technology. And we have about 10 IITs, very, very eminent centers of excellence of learning. By the way, India has committed to set up 2 centers of excellence in IT in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we are working on that because we would like to share our IT knowledge to various other countries, friendly countries. And we are yet to determine the venues of these IT centers. But these would be the first IT centers in the whole of Europe, which India will be setting up. So we feel that it will be very exciting for us how we can do that. But I am quite actively pursuing that, and we recently gave them a draft MOU to be signed, and once that is done, we will go ahead in doing that. Higher education, it is the 3rd largest education system in the world, with 42 central universities, 275 state universities, and 130 deemed universities, and various other private universities and colleges, etc. We have therefore generated a highly pooled, qualified talent pool of technical graduates in the world. And we have nearly, on an average, 20% of our graduates are going out of the universities every year to various foreign universities, doing well, doing their research and other things. Emerging IT superpower. We have, as I said, we have got a very strong IT background now, and we invite students from various parts of the world also to come to India and study in our universities. Space. We have developed space quite actively. Last year we launched a satellite, or what we call a Mars orbiter mission to Mars, to the planet Mars. And earlier in 2008, we had our first voyage to the moon. It was called Chandrayaan. And we have been launching our own satellites as well as we launch other satellites also from our satellite station, which is typically indigenous in India. Defense sector, we have a lot of improvements in the defense sector. We are the 7th largest defense budget in the world, and we are one of the biggest defense equipments importer in the world. We have to be cautious about our neighborhood, because our neighborhood is a very challenging neighborhood, and we have threats from all sides in our neighborhood. So we have to be always prepared, we always have to be conscious of the needs for defense. This is a DRDO, is a body which has been doing research in defense, and it has a network of 52 laboratories and 5,000 scientists engaged in this defense research work. And all these things you see, these have been all indigenously manufactured in India. Bosnia, we know, has a good capability of manufacturing arms equipments. We are working on that, how we can develop further our collaboration. There is a defense cooperation MOU which has been placed, which is now being examined from both sides. Cinema, Bollywood, you know, everybody knows Bollywood. I cannot be more, everybody laughs, smile at Bollywood. Now, Bollywood had 100 years of life. 2013, last year, it celebrated its centenary. Our first Indian film, indigenously produced, was produced in 1913. And that was by a person called Dadabhai Phalke, who is a doyen of Indian cinema. And thereafter, we have not stopped. Every year, we produce something like 1,288 feature films in 2009, out of 2,961 films, documentaries. In fact, we are now starting an Indian Film Festival here, and I thank Mr. Spahich for giving us that opportunity. So the festival begins from tomorrow at 5 p.m. So those of you who are free, can your auditorium contain so many people? Yeah, so it is for all. We are showing 8 films in the Turkish Cultural Center here. First time that we are bringing so many films to Sarajevo. And Sarajevo Winter Festival, it's a very good venue for us to launch this Indian Film Festival. We also have some documentary films on India. Maybe Mr. Ibrahim Spahich will make some arrangement for that, how they can be shown. So this is how Indian cinema has grown tremendously over the time. And I know how popular Indian cinema is here over television. Leading tourism destination, just 2 aspects, Goa and the Taj Mahal. Medical tourism is one of the major areas now, growing areas in India. Medical tourism, we have 2 parts. One is the traditional part, which is Ayurveda, massage, spa, etc. And the other is modern, because we have good deal of facilities now. And people come to India. It is a 2 billion industry going to be by 2015. It grows at the rate of 30,000. Every year, 150,000 patients are coming to India. Foreigner patients are coming to India, because the treatment in India comes about 4 times cheaper than what you would get in America or UK or Europe, anywhere. So if you need treatment, all kinds of treatment, specialized treatment, anything, you can come to India for treatment. Of course, yoga. Again, all of you know yoga. Ayurveda is the oldest system of traditional medicine in the world. Actually, Ayurveda is called the 5th Veda. I showed you the 4 Vedas. Ayurveda is called the 5th Veda. Ayurveda means the science of life. Ayur is life, Veda is science. Cuisine, we have a great deal of cuisine in India, but just have brought to north and south. But there is a great deal of variety in Indian cuisine. Wherever you go, you have different kinds of food in India. Indian diaspora, we have this time about 30 million Indian people living outside of India. And these are some of the very famous Indians who have made a name for themselves in the Indian diaspora. Our growth is basically fueled on savings and investment. We have saving about 35% of GDP That is a very, very substantial amount of savings which we get, and we get remittances also. Nearly 70 billion US dollars every year we are getting from our diaspora, and that is how it's a good, and we project in this financial year $1 trillion worth of expenditure on infrastructure. And we invite foreign direct investment on infrastructure besides other areas, 100% FDI. Huge market, 400 million strong market. So India's potential will always be there for investment, for consumption. And despite the recession in Europe, despite the problems in America, Indian economy was not much disturbed because we managed, because of this. We have such a huge market that our manufacturers can do business with this 400 million strong market. It is more than the European market combined. All the European countries have market. This is my last slide showing emerging new India into a world of increasing competition for global space, market space. Today, our whatever we have in India is two policies we have adopted. One is to share with the rest of the world what we have. Our technology, our IT prowess, our education faculty, we believe in sharing with the rest of the world, particularly with the developing world. Because we also belong to the developing world, what we call an emerging market economy. That is number one. Number two, we develop our country quite well to invite foreign investment into our country as well. So those are the two principles on which we are moving in this market space, because everybody is now jostling for some position in this market space. And we hope that we will advance, if not as much as in the first millennium, but at least we will make progress and keep in touch with other big countries, big economies. We are part of almost all the global forums in the world today, and India's voice is reckoned and respected today. So thank you very much, and if you have any
Ambassador, ukoliko imate neko pitanje, naravno možete postaviti. Njegove ekscelencije, ja bih samo htio da kažem da tačno prije 40 godina sam ja bio ovdje u savjetu univerziteta kao predsjednik studenata Sarajevskog univerziteta, jedine studentske organizacije koja je znala što hoće tada, jer je tad nastao Ustav Bosne i Hercegovine, na osnovu kojeg su danas nezavisna zemlja. I tad sam sjedio u parlamentu državnom. Želim da i vi sjedite u državnom parlamentu ove 2014. I da vi isto tako znate što hoćete narednih 40 godina. Jedan podatak koji je bitan ovdje da imamo 30 skoro univerziteta privatni, a koliko sam vidio ovdje, Indija ima 90. To je jedna siromašna zemlja, ima jedan bogati prostor sa intelektualcima i vidjeli ste, prije tačno 23 godine sam imao priliku da razgovaram sa generalom Nambijanom. Tad sam vodio Centar za mir, bili su ovdje neki aktivisti, kao Cita i kao Somun. I ta 23 godine prije smo rekli, on mi je rekao, ostaćemo, nemojte to objaviti, najmanje onoliko koliko i na Kipru. Ja sam rekao, možete ostati dugo, nemojte dijeliti ko na Kipru i raditi ono što ste radili. 23 godine poslije imamo zadovoljstvo da je Indija zemlja koja je priznala Bosnu i Hercegovinu davno prije, da govori ambasador Indije na univerzitetu koji mi je posebno važan i drag, zato zahvaljujem rektoru, projektorima, studentima, profesorima i posebno ministru, ambasadorima našim i ljudima koji će biti ambasadori, što su dopratili prije svega studenti, profesori, njegove ekscelencije ambasadora u stepenice na pravni fakultet, u rektorat univerziteta u Sarajevu. Bilo mi jedno divno pitanje od studenta. Molim vas, upoznajte se sa vašim fakultetom. Mi smo sa filozofskog fakulteta. Ja sam rekao, to je vaš univerzitet. Tu jeste vi svi domaćini. I pravni fakultet tamo smješta na istom mjestu gdje je rektorat. Neću vas ja više gnjaviti, samo htio da vam nešto kažem. Kada poredite ovo vrijeme između onoga što jeste 1000-godišnje carstvo ili imperatori različiti, indijski, ili islamski, muslimanski, vidjet ćete zapravo i te podjele koje su vezane za Bangladeš, Pakistan, isti vest, Pakistan, za Indiju, jednu veliku lekciju povijesnu. Danas pred vama stoji jedan izbor da jednostavno vi držite u rukama sudbinu Bosne, ne drži niko drugi, ova generacija to. Mi koji smo nešto činili prije 40, 50, 20, 10 ili prije samo godinu dana, ili smo još uvijek tu negdje u bilo kakvoj formi sa vama, nemamo drugu mogućnost nego da učimo lekcije od drugih. To je jedna pametna stvar, učite lekcije od drugih. Ako neko može imati danas, prije 30-20 godina kad je Francuska osvajala nano centre i pravila nanotehnologiju i otvarala prve svjetske centre, ja sam pitao naše kolege, sam tad bio isto u parlamentu, hoćemo li mi konačno ići na nanotehnologiju ili ćemo na nanotehnologiju ići. I ljudi se odluče nanotehnologiju za sve čije. Ja vas molim da se odlučite, volite svoje nane, ali odlučite se za nanotehnologiju. I sarađujte s Indijom svim mogućim načinima, na svim mogućim područjima. Imate veliku šansu, svijet je sad otvoren potpuno i oni prema nama. Ako imate neko pitanje, ja vas molim da iskoristite moje prisustvo, da omogućim ambasador govori. Ako nemate, imali prvo pitanje, demokratski. Koliko vidim, evo, jedno, dva pitanja, izvolite. Hoćete doći ovdje da vas vide, da upamte vaša lica i kroz godine. I onda ćemo, kad završite pitanja, još jedno vas podsjeća na poziv njegove ekscelencije, sutra u 5, imate 8 dana zajedno osim subotom i nedeljom, svaki put 5 sati u Turskog kulturnom centru na engleskom titlu, dakle za obrazovanu generaciju. Iz svih dijelova Indije je izabrano 8 filmova, koji su nagrađeni svjetskim filmima. Dakle, vidjet ćete cijelu Indiju kroz film. A za vašu informaciju, Bollywood je bio na Sarajevskoj zimi, to ambasador nije morao znati. A vi sada kad postavljate pitanja, mislite na to da budete, recimo, ambasadori u Bosni i Hercegovini.
Dobar dan, poštovani kolege, profesori. Moje pitanje iz indijskog ambasadora će biti uglavnom vezano za...
Na engleskom, ako možete zvon.
I was trying to address both types of audience at the same time. Well, my question is, what is the stance of India when it comes to the BRICS group? Brazil, India, China, South Africa.
When it comes
to the BRICS. And what is the relation between China and India and Russia in both economic and security sense? Thank you.
I didn't touch on the multilateral organization deliberately because I didn't have time. But BRICS is one of the very important groupings in the world today. And India, of course, is one of the 5 members, along with B for Brazil, R for Russia, I, of course, India, C for China, and S for South Africa. You would note that each of these countries are located in one continent. Nearly, Russia, you can say, is far away from India, and of course, China, of course, is part of us, but South Africa and Brazil, they are in 2 different places. These were formed in 2006 as a part of a study which made this kind of a grouping by a certain future assessment. And the future assessment was by 2025, by 2030, certain goalposts it kept. By 2050, that there will be a total change in the economic architecture of the world. It had. Even India would be bypassing US's economy by that time, and there will be a complete change. Today, to corroborate what has happened, we see a big shift in capital from Europe going towards the east. You have investments coming up in China, in India, in Korea, in Japan. These are the 4 giant economies of the world today, to which countries of the Western bloc are looking at. So BRICS is growing strength to strength, and we have excellent collaboration among our member countries. In fact, we are now thinking of establishing our own bank, where we will engage in our own trade and commerce in our respective currencies, and we will not use the dollar, US dollar currency. And we already have set up this bank with certain contributions from each member countries, and every year it has a meeting, and they meet for summits, and in the summit there are major decisions taken in the BRICS. Coming to India's relation with China and Russia, China and Russia are 2 different entities for India. With China, India's relation is multi-layered. We have suffered through war. We have also enjoyed our relationship. China is both our partner as well as it has been hostile to India in the past. We have the largest trade bilaterally with China in the world. So it is 75 billion US dollars bilateral trade, moving fast. But out of that, China has a considerable part of their share of the bilateral trade. And India is trying to increase its trade within that. However, we have a very sad problem of our borders have not been fixed yet. What the borders had been decided by the British to demarcate the Chinese and the Indian border, that has not yet been properly demarcated. So we have periodic incursions, sometimes from the Chinese side, and we had a border war, that's why in '62. So it is a complicated relationship. I cannot tell you in very short time. It requires a full 1 hour description. With Russia, it is more simple, because with Russia, we engaged with Russia soon after our independence. And though we did not get into any power bloc, like NATO or Warsaw Pact, like some other countries did, very close to you, we had what we call a NAM, a non-aligned movement, where we steered clear of any of these power blocs, neither West nor East. So this of course gave way to a Cold War, and we were trapped in the Cold War. However, today the position is much different. Today the NAM is still there, but India has taken positions sometimes in favor of Russia, sometimes in favor of other countries. We have to move in this world. We have to be more realistic, pragmatic. Develop our foreign policy on the basis of pragmatism. Nowadays, pragmatism is the cornerstone of every country's foreign policy. So we cannot be ideologically bound anymore. We may not be liking the ideology of Russia, but we have to do business with Russia. We have to engage ourselves, and our business with Russia is heavy, very heavy. We have business with Russia in perhaps all areas. So if Russia does something, like in the present context, we cannot afford to be very vocal about condemning Russia in these circumstances, for obvious reasons. Any other question?
Sljedeća, izvolite. Sam, imam još pitanja. Nema, znači 2 pitanja.
My name is Georgi Knežić. I'm a student of political science, and I have 2 questions for you. First of all, I downloaded one document, and it's an official document from the webpage Embassy of India. And that document, was very interesting one sentence. It's called that India trade with Bosnia has been minuscule, to miniature, for a variety of reasons, including instability, geographical distance, weak banking sector, poor infrastructure. I can understand these other reasons, but the first reason that you mentioned in this official document is instability. So my question is, do you mean about economical instability, political instability, or social instability in Bosnia? And that's the first question. I have another question. The other question is about investments in Bosnia. The second investment in Bosnia and Herzegovina from India is ArcelorMittal, the company Zenz. I have a question, especially it was for me very interesting that if you see that in India happened one of the biggest gas industry catastrophe in Bhopal in 1980 and 1984. But today, in 2011, there's so many people, workers there, that they're protesting because environmental laws are being neglected by the company ArcelorMittal, especially by Mr. Lakshmi Mittal, who is the seventh richest man in the world. Here, yes, here, especially. There's also iron problems in Cleveland and others. So my question is, if you're coming from the country as India, with all respect for that gas industry catastrophe happened there, if there are any possibility for the government or embassy of India pushing or pressing this company, ArcelorMittal, because of the workers and people who live there? That's a good question. Thank you very much.
I'll answer your second question first. ArcelorMittal is not an Indian company. It's not an Indian company. Mr. Mittal is an Indian national. But he owns this company, which is registered in London, and it has an office in Luxembourg. Therefore, Government of India cannot officially intervene in any kind of things which are happening in ArcelorMittal. There are about 10 Indian nationals, we know, and we interact with them because they are Indian nationals. As the Indian embassy accredited here, it is our responsibility to look after their welfare. But that is it. ArcelorMittal's profits are not sent to India. So that answers your question. Environmental laws, yet we are in close touch with them. I did not know this fact, and maybe it could be perhaps discussed sometime at some forum. I'm not very sure, because I have met them. There are two concerns. One is Zenitsa, they have a concern, and they have another concern in Umaska, near Prijedor. I have visited both, and but nobody has raised this matter of violation of environmental law, so I cannot comment on that. Your second question is interesting. Yes, we have put it in our website, and it is a fact that certain ways of looking at the Bosnian society, as is generally perceived by social scientists, as for example, you had this unrest some 1 month back. There is a current of instability within the society, it cannot be denied. Putting it in an official website, I think official website is not a sanitized work. Official website can be clear and frank. I mean, we have to tell the people what today's Bosnia is. I mean, there's no point. Suppose you have a situation like that happening in the streets of Sarajevo, we cannot deny that. If they happen, they are happening. And why are they happening? I mean, social scientists are going into the cause of why this instability is happening in the society. So we have just put it. So I don't think the Indian embassy could be faulted because we have written that word instability. And the other thing is our trade quantum is minuscule, which is correct. Our trade quantum does not show signs of improvement. Our bilateral trade is a minuscule 60 million US dollars, which is nothing. Compared to the potential of India, compared to the potential of Bosnia, I think we can go far ahead. We can at least make it 100 million, if not more. We have potential. In fact, I have been discussing with the government. I have sat with the Minister of Industry, and we have a mechanism of our industry bodies meeting together from time to time. We have the people coming on trade delegations, etc. I have met the Deputy Minister for Trade and Economic Relations, who I am again going to meet tomorrow. So it is ongoing. It is not that we are leaving it at that, because we know that there could have been some temporary disturbances to this trade flow, but I think India's potential is big, and we are inviting all the time trade delegations from Bosnia to come to India, and similarly we are bringing our delegations to India. So minuscule is a relative thing. Minuscule is just today. Maybe tomorrow it's become 100 million, we'll quote it's 100 million. And if you see the figures, this is fine. I mean, compared to other countries' trade of India, certainly it's a small sum. And there is no shame in hiding it. So, but we are improving it. We are trying to improve. We are studying the factors. Why the trade factor is minuscule. Any other question? Did I answer your question?
I just want one question. You mentioned this. As a private company, and that as he's a private company, that you cannot make pressure on the.
No. It is not an Indian company.
Yes.
If it was an Indian company, we could have pressure. It is a company registered in Luxembourg and has its head office in London. It is not an Indian holding. It is a foreign holding. Mittal is Indian. You understand?
Yes, I understand.
He's an Indian national, no doubt. He holds an Indian passport.
No, I mentioned this, as I said, the question for me is that anyone who is capable of putting pressure on those companies, especially someone who is coming from a country, I was here for something company, and understand.
If I talk later, I think you should go over the
Thank you very much. Was taken by clear.
Ja sam dok ne zbali gospodine
Sad smo na prostoru univerziteta.
zato što 12 sati na dogovorili.
I don't have any idea of starting any controversy or becoming politically, making difficult statement. No, it was a general statement which we have put in our database, our website. Why we feel the trade is not going up, and there are several factors. Of course, stability factor is also very important for investors, particularly. They will see country stability before coming to put the money in the country's market. That is how it is.